Welcome back into SEC now. Alyssa Lang, Coach Stinch. We got more bowls to talk about. This time we're moving on to the ACC. A couple of matchups between the SEC and the ACC. And I feel like this is an interesting one because the ACC is one of those conferences that I feel like goes back and forth with the SEC the most when it comes to fans saying, my conference, no, my conference. So it starts with Mississippi State, Louisville. They'll face off in the Franklin American Mortgage Music City Bowl on December 30th. This is an interesting matchup with Kylan Hill against Louisville's run defense.
Yeah, it really is. And if you go back, Alyssa, to the last game of the season when Louisville played Kentucky, they got boat raced. They knew exactly what Kentucky was going to do going into the game, and Kentucky still ran for 500 yards.
Looking at the Capital One Orange Bowl, we'll see the Florida Gators face off against the 24th ranked Virginia Cavaliers. Virginia just got boat raced by Clemson, though, Stinch.
Yeah, they got a lot to bounce back from, but boy, what a great playmaker in Bryce Perkins and in a Florida defense that can really lock down.
And then in the Belk Bowl in Charlotte, Virginia Tech will take on Kentucky. We know Lynn Bowden has declared to go to the NFL, but he will be playing in the bowl game. Sorry, Virginia Tech fans everywhere breathing a sigh of the opposite of relief that Lynn Bowden is going to be playing against them. So looking at these matchups, again, I think a couple of these matchups are a little lopsided when I look at them, specifically Florida, Virginia. But looking at this Kentucky-Virginia Tech matchup, maybe a little interesting. Is there one that maybe excites you a little bit?
I like that one quite a bit when you consider the fact that Kentucky, the last time they had one of their key players already declared for the draft in Benny Snell, but he still played in the game, and boy, did he light it up. Yeah, so to me, and incidentally, the same game, now that I think about it. So he did that a couple of seasons ago. Lynn Bowden, the fact that he declared for the NFL, that's fine, but he's still going to lay it on the line, albeit in a position where he's not projected to play at the next level. You mentioned it earlier, Coach. The fact that that offense has been as prolific as it's been is pretty remarkable, especially knowing that it is as one-dimensional as you'll find outside of the service academies, and opposite a defense that has struggled stopping that element. I think that'll be a fascinating thing to see in this ball game, whether or not Kentucky can perform the way it has in the past when they've had star players already declaring for the next level.
What game I love, Alyssa, I love the Florida-Virginia matchup.
Okay.
I really do. This is an opportunity, guys, for Dan Mullen in Florida to get 11 wins. Who would have thought, again, going back 2 years ago when he took that program over, it was in such disarray. But this guy came in, won 10 last year, won a huge game in the bowl last year. Now has a chance to get Virginia and his 11th win. And I just love where Kyle Trask has gone in this offense. Let's remember, he was a backup at the beginning of the year. He goes and he takes over the quarterback position after an injury to Felipe Franks, and wow, he's been amazing. Boy, they've got some talented receivers. I mean, you look around, Kyle Pitts this year, who became their leading receiver, has showed up out of nowhere to be an unbelievable target for Kyle Trask. I love Todd Grantham, the defenses he dials up. I think this is an incredible opportunity for them to go out on the road recruiting and say, look, we won 10 our first year, 11 our next year, and the next thing is SEC championship.
The only ranked matchup of the three matchups between the two conferences, right? So you got Virginia just clinging on at 24. And then, of course, a Florida team that many contended was maybe the best team in the East Division had a tough draw out of the West. They got to play LSU every year. Just a fantastic job that they were able to do opposite a really good defense, having go to your backup quarterback in Kyle Trask.
Yeah, and important to remember, too, that Florida's couple of losses are really good losses against really good teams. That being said, what do you think is maybe the biggest challenge for these SEC teams as they take on a couple out of the ACC?
I think distraction. That's a big piece of it, and we'll talk about this throughout this month, but it's not only players trying to make decisions as to whether or not they want to continue to compete at the collegiate level, but the other piece of it, too, is from a coaching staff standpoint. When you have success, other programs are going to want to come and take a look at who's coaching, who's developing these players, who's recruiting these players. And if you're smart, you would want to emulate and maybe even borrow from these programs that have enjoyed a great deal of success. That's why what has happened at Clemson is so unique, the fact they've kept that staff intact for so long. But I think the possibility for distraction is one of the biggest issues heading into bowl seasons, more so now than any other time. It makes the conference comparison thing really challenging because we won't necessarily see the team that we saw in the regular season in the postseason, I think, because of some of the potential departures.
Well, what's interesting about the matchups against these ACC teams, that all three teams from the SEC that are playing these ACC teams ought to come in with a great mindset. They all came off great wins at the end of the season. Mississippi State winning the Egg Bowl. Florida, the way they
Great
destroyed
point. Yeah.
Florida State. You know, these teams are coming off. Kentucky, look what they did to Louisville.
Yeah.
Absolutely destroyed Louisville. These guys, this team may say, these three teams are probably going in going, I just want to play one more game with my guys.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because they ended on such a powerful note. Because what you're saying is true, Stench. I mean, the problem is that the college football playoff has created a scenario where sometimes when you get to these games, they don't become as important to the players, even though they are to the fans and everybody else.
All right, let's roll through some of our other conference versus conference matchups, moving to the Big Ten. A couple of talk about there. New Year's Day, Auburn will take on Minnesota. They were one win away from playing in the Big Ten championship. They'll face off in the Outback Bowl, Stinch.
Fantastic defense by Auburn. Obviously, a couple of defensive scores in the Iron Bowl propelled them. We talk about ending a season with a bang. Nobody did it better than the Auburn Tigers, and they got a chance to take on one of the best teams in the Big Ten in the Minnesota Gophers.
In the VRBO Citrus Bowl, we'll see Alabama face off against Michigan, two blue bloods when it comes to college football.
Yeah, I love this matchup, man. I love the physicality of this game and what that means to these players and coaches. Again, we'll see what happens at Alabama, how many guys are going to play in the game. But you know what? Mac Jones, what another great opportunity for him to take the reins of this team and see what he does in the bowl game.
January 2nd down in Duval. Y'all know I had to do it. Tennessee will take on Indiana in the Tax Slayer Gator Bowl. I mean, Tennessee, Stinch, in the Gator Bowl. It's incredible after the way they started.
What a finish. You know, a remarkable turnaround. And, of course, Tennessee fans have to be looking back on a season of what might have been. You know, you're talking about a team that could have finished with maybe 9 wins, maybe 10 wins. I mean, this is a really good football team down the stretch. It just took them a while to get there. But some interesting matchups when we talk about conference versus conference. For a lot of this year, a lot of people were saying that the Big Ten might be the deepest conference in all of college football. Obviously, they have a representative in Ohio State in the college football playoff. That may very well be the case. Obviously, we've got some pretty good matchups to compare and contrast given some of the SEC teams coming into this.
Yeah, you talk about a great matchup. This Auburn-Minnesota game is going to be a heck of a matchup. I love it. You know, and I look at the win that Auburn had in the Iron Bowl. I look at Bo Nix's first 12 games as a true freshman. And look, he's not a freshman anymore. You get a break after the Iron Bowl. You get essentially a whole spring practice under your belt. That would give him 2, start dating back to last year. And now he's going to go and he's going to play in a game against a defense that can play football. Mm-hmm. And you look and you see, you'd love to see Bo Nix in the season with this unbelievable output of production going into the offseason, right? He's got all the pieces around him that should be healthy. And look, you're not a freshman anymore. It's time for you to go out there and deliver. Oh, by the way, on the road and deliver, because that's where he struggled the most.
Looking at the Big Ten versus the SEC, I mean, these are a couple of matchups, like you guys said, Minnesota, Baylor, they were in the conversation until the end of the season. What threats do they pose to the SEC? Because to me, looking at this group of games, these are the most that I'm like, ooh, it might not be that easy for the SEC to sweep through this conference. I mean, what do you see as a challenge?
Well, when you look at the way Alabama, so when you talk about Auburn, the way they finished the season, well, how about the way Alabama finished the season and the youth that they had to have on the football field defensively, and then obviously transitioning with Mac Jones, making only his 3rd start there for the Crimson Tide. That's worthy of some hand-wringing, I think, at that point in time. And considering that, is this a great Michigan football team? There's plenty of arguments that would say that it isn't. However, is it an engaged, is it a focused, is it a motivated Michigan football team? And they also happen to have a pretty dynamic playmaker at quarterback in Shea Patterson, a guy that can extend and change plays for them. You couple all that with the fact that Alabama's going to have to play some young guys and maybe some new faces in places they otherwise typically wouldn't because where they are in the postseason, I think that poses an interesting threat to the end of the season for Alabama. They better regroup. You don't want to end the season with 2 straight losses. That's a team that potentially could deal them one.
Well, you talk about a game that's very interesting to me, and it absolutely matters how they end it. That's Tennessee, because they started slow, as we know, ended up with so much momentum. The way they've played defensively, to me, Stench, has been the key. You look at Daniel Patulli, Darrell Taylor, Nigel Warrior. These are all senior guys that have stepped up to the plate for Tennessee and changed this football team. You can talk about Garantano and the success he's had, but I can tell you, they don't win those last several games if this defense did not come on and play. And they've got a challenge against an Indiana offense that averages 450 yards a game. That's a lot of yards, and they throw for over 300. So this will be a great challenge for these guys. If they can go to this bowl game, get another win, get win number 8, enormous momentum going into the offseason.
3-0 against the Big Ten?
I'm going with it.
Yeah? Stinch?
Sure. I mean, why not?
Why not? Throwing all the cards on the table.
I'm going
Why
with
not?
it.
9-0, right?
I'm going
That's
with
what
it.
you're thinking. All right.
How about 9-0?
Plenty more coming up next on SEC Now. We'll break up some of the matchups that you'll want to watch in a couple of these bowl games, and there are some good ones. Plus, we'll catch up with Lynn Bowden Jr., the Duke